AITA for ignoring my boyfriend when he asked me to split the check with his big family and only paying for my food. Then they demanded that I pay in full as an apology. So this happened recently, and I'm still a little rattled, confused, and honestly just hurt. I'm a 42-year-old woman and I've been dating my boyfriend David, who is 44, for about a year and a half. We both come from working-class backgrounds, but our families took very different approaches as they grew more financially stable. My parents, once they gained some economic progress, tried their best to give me a good life. I had access to nice things, good education, and experiences that helped shape me. David, on the other hand, grew up with a father who was not just frugal but downright antagonistic toward the idea of spending on his family. His dad accused David's mother of being a gold digger who used her children as pawns to bleed him dry. Eventually, he left her and remarried, leaving her with 4 children to raise, limited support, and what seems like a lasting chip on everyone's shoulder. Now, I knew his family dynamics were complicated, and I've tried to be understanding. I've always supported David emotionally and never made a big deal out of the fact that I earn significantly more than he does, about 5 times more, to be precise. It's never been an issue in our relationship. Or so I thought. Then came the invitation. David's mother was turning 65, and there was going to be a big family dinner at a trendy mid-range restaurant in the city. I was surprised to be invited, to be honest. I had always felt a little unwelcome by his family, especially his mother and sisters. Not that they were ever rude to my face, but I got the strong sense that they didn't really care for me. I'm not into anime, or manga, or wrestling, or rock bands from the early 2000s, all of which they seem to obsess over. I never held that against them, but it did make it hard to find common ground. Still, I was glad to be included. It felt like maybe things were warming up. Maybe I was finally being brought into the fold. That optimism died within 10 minutes of arriving at the restaurant. We were a group of 16, David, his siblings, their spouses, a bunch of nieces and nephews ranging from around 8 years old to early 20s, and his mother, of course. I sat next to David at first, but he kept getting pulled into sibling photos, inside jokes, and conversations I couldn't penetrate. They talked over me constantly. The first time I tried to share a story, they all resumed their discussion about some anime episode as though I hadn't spoken. I brushed it off. Social dynamics can be messy. But then it happened again. I was literally starting a sentence, trying to engage with a comment someone made about travel, and I had to start over 3 times. 3 times. Every time I opened my mouth, someone would cut me off or shift the topic. And it wasn't like they didn't hear me, they were actively ignoring me. I ended up finishing my thought to myself, quietly, while everyone carried on. It was humiliating. Only David seemed to notice. He gave me a little shrug and made a half-hearted joke about how rowdy his family could be. He then went off to take another round of pictures with his siblings and sat down 3 chairs away from me afterward. I wasn't completely alone, his niece and a cousin were on either side, but I wasn't part of the conversation either. I just kind of sat there, sipping my drink, watching everyone else laugh and bond. I felt out of place, invisible, and increasingly anxious. I even pulled out my phone at one point just to give myself something to do. When the food came, everyone had ordered pretty freely. Multiple margaritas, expensive appetizer samplers, desserts for the table. I kept it modest. I had 2 soft drinks, 1 margarita, a bowl of soup, and a ribs plate. Nothing extravagant. I was honestly just trying to be polite and not make a big deal out of anything. Then the check arrived. It was a hefty one, unsurprisingly. David's mother immediately announced that the cost would be split evenly between the adults, 8 of us in total, since she wouldn't be paying on her own birthday. That meant about $160 to $170 per adult, regardless of what anyone had ordered. Now, I'm all for being generous. I'm not stingy with money. But I don't enjoy being taken advantage of, especially not when I'm already feeling unwelcome. I quietly told David that I'd rather just pay for what I consumed. Or, if it made things easier, I'd be happy to pay for myself, him, and his adult daughter, who had also come along. That would have put me somewhere around $120, which I thought was still generous. His reaction shocked me. His face tightened, contorted is really the only word for it, and he gave me this low, growling whisper that was just short of yelling. He told me not to act up, not to embarrass him, and accused me of being petty over a small amount of money. I felt blindsided. I tried to explain again that it wasn't about the money, it was about fairness. But he wasn't hearing it. His voice was firm, his tone sharp, and I suddenly felt like a child being scolded. I felt bullied. There's no other word for it. So I stood up, excused myself politely, and walked over to the waitress. I apologized for the trouble, asked her to calculate my part of the bill, plus a very good tip, and paid on my own. She was gracious and helpful, and I returned to my seat. As soon as David found out, his face turned red. The whole table went quiet. It was clear that I had violated some unspoken family rule, and I became the villain in an instant. On the way to the car, David exploded again. He said that this would be the last time I embarrass him in front of his family. That I had deliberately made a point of showing off that I had more money, and that I was rubbing it in the faces of people who had sacrificed to attend the dinner despite being low on cash. I was stunned. I had tried to be considerate, tried to avoid conflict, and I was the one being accused of snobbery. I told him flat out that I felt bullied. That being ignored all night, then pressured to pay for food and drinks I didn't consume, and finally being scolded for standing up for myself was not okay. And that if he expected me to continue showing up to family events just to be treated like that again, he was dreaming. I haven't spoken to him since. He sent messages and eventually apologized, but the way he apologized still felt like he thought I was overreacting. He keeps bringing up how his family is poor, how they sacrifice to be there, and how this was just one night I could have let things slide. But why should I always be the one to let things slide? Why is my financial independence a reason to treat me like an open wallet? Some of my friends support me and say I stood up for myself in a situation where I was clearly being mistreated. But a few others have said I'm making a mountain out of a molehill and potentially ruining a relationship over money. But to me, this isn't about money. It's about respect. It's about being made to feel like an outsider and then being scolded when I draw a boundary. So now I'm wondering, am I the asshole for refusing to pay more than my fair share, for not just swallowing my pride and going along with the group? Or was I right to stand up for myself, even if it meant creating tension on what was supposed to be a family celebration? Because from where I'm standing, I don't see how protecting my own boundaries suddenly makes me the villain. Update 1. A few weeks passed after that miserable dinner, and I had started to move on, or at least, I was trying to. I focused on work, spent more time with my friends, and tried to process everything that had happened. I still hadn't replied to David's messages. At first, they were infrequent, just a couple of half-hearted, "Hey," or "Can we talk?" texts, but they slowly began to increase in frequency and emotional weight. He started writing longer messages, saying he missed me, that he had been thinking a lot, that he regretted the way things unfolded. He claimed that he had talked to his family about it, that they realized they were out of line, and that they wanted to apologize. According to him, they were open to starting fresh. He said they wanted to make amends and invited me to dinner again, same restaurant, same setup, just a simple dinner to make peace. To say I was skeptical would be a massive understatement. Every instinct in my body was telling me to steer clear of this potential disaster. But against my better judgment, I started to wonder, what if they really had reflected? What if the tension had made them realize how wrong the whole situation was? What if this was a genuine attempt to make things right, and I refused to show up? Would I be the one holding a grudge while they tried to move forward? So I agreed. I took my time getting ready, but I didn't go all out. I wore something clean and simple. No flashy accessories. No designer bag. I didn't want to give them even the faintest excuse to accuse me of showing off. I told myself I'd be neutral, pleasant, give them a fair shot, and if things went south again, I'd leave, no hesitation. When I arrived, the vibe seemed decent. Not warm, exactly, but certainly not hostile. A couple of people smiled when they saw me, even waved. One of David's sisters made small talk about the weather, and a niece complimented my earrings. I took my seat, heart pounding, but kept my face calm. David was already there, seated beside his mother. He looked a little nervous, but greeted me with a light nod, as if to say thank you for coming. It all felt like maybe, just maybe, this could go okay. The conversation wasn't deep, but it was friendly enough. I made a few comments and this time, people actually responded. Not with excitement, but they didn't completely talk over me either. I still felt like a guest at someone else's family reunion, but the vibe was at least tolerable. I picked something modest off the menu again, nothing extravagant, and stuck to water. Everyone else ordered pretty much as they had last time, maybe even more. Margarita pitchers were flowing, appetizers came and went, and at one point someone mentioned ordering another dessert round. And then the check arrived. I was already mentally preparing for it. I had my card ready, fully intending to pay my share, maybe even cover David and his daughter's meals like I had offered last time, just to keep the peace. But I never got the chance. David's mother, with a tone so matter-of-fact it stunned me, said, "We thought that since you were sorry last time and wanted to do everything honestly, this time you could set an example and pay for everything, as a gesture of apology for that scene." It was like the air was sucked out of the room. For a second, I was convinced I had misheard. I looked around slowly, trying to catch someone's eye, some signal that this was a joke or at the very least a misunderstanding. But no one said anything. Not one person intervened. Not even David. He avoided my gaze entirely. Just stared down at his plate, like if he didn't look at me, he could pretend he wasn't part of this grotesque little play. I stared at him, silently begging him to step in, to shut it down, to do anything at all. But he said nothing. Not a single word. I felt something deep in my chest break. This wasn't about money, not anymore. This was about being humiliated under the guise of peace. About being baited into a fake reconciliation just so they could put me in my place again, this time with a polite smile instead of outright rudeness. It was calculated, and it was cruel. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I just looked at his mother and said calmly that I would be paying for my own meal and no one else's. Then I stood up, walked to the waitress, who again was patient and kind, and paid for what I had ordered with a generous tip. As I stood there waiting for my receipt, I could feel all their eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing my face. I walked out of that restaurant without looking back. I didn't call David. I didn't text him. I didn't block him either, but the silence was intentional. I didn't talk to them for a week. Update 2. It took time, but something shifted inside me. After that second dinner, after being invited under the guise of reconciliation only to be publicly cornered and humiliated again, I fell into a strange kind of stillness. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, not because the world has calmed down, but because you've decided you're done trying to hold up the sky. The silence between me and David dragged on. He sent a couple of messages, light at first, tentative, almost cowardly, but I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish him. Not even out of anger. I had moved beyond that. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. There's a moment when you stop debating what you should tolerate and you just know. Not from logic or fear, but from something deeper. From exhaustion, maybe. Or self-respect. I wasn't sad. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't rehashing conversations in my mind or wondering if I should have spoken more gently, tried harder to explain, or looked at things from their side. I had done all of that already. I had twisted myself into all the polite shapes, worn all the social armor, tried all the diplomacy. I had shown up kind, open, giving. And they had shown up cruel. Passive-aggressive. Entitled. The second dinner, where they told me with a smile that I should set an example by paying for everyone as a gesture of apology, had stripped away every last illusion. That was not a misunderstanding. That was a test. A trap. A punishment dressed up as a chance to make peace. And David? David had watched it happen. Sat there in silence while his family took turns stabbing at my dignity with silver forks and folded napkins, and did absolutely nothing to stop it. The silence that followed didn't ache, it clarified. I realized something I should have seen much sooner. While I was trying to be gracious, fair, kind, even humble, I had been used. Repeatedly. That first dinner, they ignored me. Talked over me. Made me feel invisible, like I was lucky just to be there. Then they expected me to help pay for their celebration like it was a tax on being included. And when I had the nerve to opt out of being financially steamrolled, they made me the villain. The rich outsider. The ungrateful one. Then, when I gave them a second chance, when I let my guard down and walked back and hoping to mend something real, they pulled the same trick again, only this time, they wrapped it in smiles and called it tradition. They didn't want to make peace. They didn't want to accept me. They wanted to remind me of my place. Or rather, the place they thought I belonged in. Not one of them. Never one of them. Just the woman who made more money. The one who, in their minds, owed them something for that. The walking wallet. The ticket to nice things they'd never be able to afford on their own. They had no interest in building a bridge, they wanted to keep me on the other side of it and make me pay the toll just to get a seat at the table. So I decided if this was the game, I would play it. I wouldn't grovel. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't try to be the bigger person and shrink myself down into something palatable. I would show them exactly who they were dealing with, but on my terms. I crafted the message to David carefully. I told him I wanted to make peace, to put the whole mess behind us once and for all. I said I wanted to invite his family out, my treat. A real dinner. Something special. A thank you for giving reconciliation a chance. He fell for it immediately. Told me this was what he had been hoping for. That this meant so much. That he was sure everyone would be thrilled. And they were. Within a day, the text started rolling in. His sisters sent heart emojis. One of them even called me a queen. His mother replied with a little smiley face and wrote, "That would be lovely, dear." The cousins, the in-laws, the whole crowd, everyone confirmed. There was a buzz. I could feel their anticipation through the screen. It was the same tone you hear when someone's just found out they're getting an all-expenses-paid trip to somewhere fancy. They were giddy. Not grateful, expectant. They thought they'd won. So I made sure the evening was exactly what they thought it would be. I booked one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. The kind of place you don't just stumble into, you plan for it, wait for it, budget for it. A Michelin star-level experience on the top floor of a 5-star hotel with panoramic views, soft candlelight, and a string quartet playing classical interpretations of modern ballads. Every detail was intentional. The service was flawless. The wine list read like a novel. The tasting menu had seasonal dishes built around imported truffles, foie gras, hand-rolled pasta, dry-aged cuts, rare shellfish flown in that morning, and sauces made from reductions that had simmered for days. The type of meal where the server comes out to introduce each dish and asks if anyone has questions about the origin of the sea salt. When everyone arrived, I noticed how different they looked. Polished. Trying. Someone had clearly looked up the restaurant. The sisters were in nice dresses, his mother had her hair styled, even the cousins looked more put together. There were glances around the room, wide eyes, hushed commentary about the lighting, the table settings, the view. They weren't just surprised, they were impressed. This was not their world, and they knew it. I welcomed them with warmth. Smiled. Complimented their outfits. Said how happy I was that we could all be together, that it felt like a fresh start. And then I ordered. And I didn't hold back. I consulted with the sommelier. I asked about specials. I picked dishes I had never tasted before and savored every bite. Truffle-infused scallops with a beurre blanc so delicate it nearly melted into the plate. Hand-cut tagliatelle with aged parmesan and shaved black truffle. Duck breast seared to perfection, resting on a bed of wild mushroom risotto. I tried the caviar trio with 3 different kinds of roe, paired with a flight of champagne. I asked for tasting notes. I lingered over the courses. And they watched. At first, they were timid. But then the atmosphere swallowed them up. The wine flowed. The laughter came more easily. Someone asked if they could try the oysters. Another pointed to the steak tartare. Slowly, they began to follow my lead. Bottles were opened. Appetizers ordered freely. Dessert sampled just because they looked pretty. They started to relax into it, this strange new luxury. One of his sisters called it a dream. His mother said it felt like something out of a movie. They kept saying how nice it was that we could do this. How amazing it was to be all together like this. How cool I was for making it happen. And I nodded, smiled, agreed with every word. Every compliment. Every toast. And when the check came, over $2,000, neatly tucked into a black leather folio, I picked it up with all the grace in the world. I glanced at the total. I didn't blink. I looked up and smiled and said, well, as usual, let's split it among everyone, right? Some were shocked, some were angry, and some seemed to be thinking. Update 3. Exactly 1 week after that dinner, the one I now refer to in my head as the reckoning, I received a message from David's sister. It came unexpectedly, late in the afternoon while I was finishing up work. I had braced myself for some snide remark or another passive-aggressive jab, but instead, I found something very different. Her message was short, simple, and sincere. She wrote, "Do you want to meet and talk honestly?" No emojis. No sarcasm. Just those words, direct and plain. I sat with the message for a few minutes, rereading it, trying to decide whether this was another trap or something real. I hadn't spoken to anyone in the family since that night. I hadn't responded to the shocked messages, the "what the hell just happened" texts, or the calls that came in over the next 2 days. I had been silent, not because I wanted them to stew in guilt, but because for the first time in a long time, I felt calm. In control. Unbothered. But that message, it pulled at something in me. I told her yes. We agreed to meet at a quiet, tucked-away coffee shop that had warm lighting and a big round table in the back. I arrived a few minutes early, half expecting her to show up alone, but then they came in, one after another. David. His 2 sisters. His 2 brothers. And even his mother. The entire inner circle. I felt like I had stepped into one of those infamous Reddit posts where the family finally gathers to say, "All right, who's the asshole here?" It was a surreal moment. No one was laughing. No one was smug. No one looked defensive or prepared to attack. They just looked tired. Like people who had finally realized that they'd been playing a game no one was winning. We sat down together, and the air was heavy with things unsaid. But they began. Gently. Slowly. The conversation that unfolded over the next 2 hours was something I hadn't thought possible. They admitted that they had treated me poorly. That their behavior at both dinners had been unfair, hurtful, and rooted in more than just rudeness. It had come from a place of deep, long-standing pain. One of the brothers said that ever since their father left, money had been a shadow in every room, a reminder of everything they didn't have. His sister added that growing up watching their mother struggle while their father lived comfortably with his new wife had left a bitter taste that never fully faded. Over the years, that bitterness turned into suspicion, toward anyone who seemed to have it easier, toward women who were perceived as doing better, toward anyone who reminded them, consciously or not, of the divide. I listened, taking it all in, not saying much at first. When I finally spoke, I told them I understood, that I wasn't heartless or oblivious. I knew what resentment looked like. I knew what it felt like to carry scars from the past. But I also told them, firmly, that I was not their father. I wasn't the villain from their childhood, I wasn't the person who abandoned them, or chose comfort over responsibility. I was just a woman who cared about their brother. Who wanted to support her partner. Who tried to show up with kindness, only to be met with suspicion and hostility because I didn't fit their expectations of what one of them should look like. I told them that I had tried to meet them halfway. That I had sat through being talked over, ignored, and guilt-tripped. That I had offered fairness and was met with manipulation. That I had given them chances, not out of obligation, but because I genuinely believed in treating people with grace. And that last dinner? That was me giving them a taste of their own rules. Not to humiliate, not to retaliate, but to reflect. To show what it felt like when the game they played was flipped back onto them. David didn't say much. He sat quietly for most of it, eyes downcast, hands clasped in front of him. He looked like someone caught between shame and realization, as if the weight of the last few months had finally settled into something heavy and immovable in his chest. And when the silence stretched and no one knew what else to say, he looked up at me and said, "Maybe I don't deserve you." For the first time in a long time, I didn't rush to comfort him. I didn't downplay his words. I didn't offer a soft landing. Because the truth was, he was right. In that moment, I completely agreed with him. Not out of superiority or spite, but because I had been showing up with loyalty, empathy, and patience, and he had allowed me to be made into a scapegoat. Over and over again. I thanked them for their honesty. For sitting down. For speaking plainly. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. There was no dramatic goodbye. Just clarity. I stood up, told them I appreciated the talk, and said goodbye. And this time, I walked away not with heartbreak, but with peace. David and I didn't break up on the spot. But the dynamic changed. He admitted his mistakes, not just to me, but to himself. He apologized for being passive, for not defending me, for letting old wounds dictate present choices. And as weeks passed, our relationship began to rebuild, slowly, differently. He started showing up in ways he hadn't before. With intention. With accountability. With presence. And as for me, I didn't lose myself in this mess. I didn't let bitterness swallow me whole. I didn't become smaller to fit someone else's discomfort. In fact, I found something I hadn't realized I'd been missing, my own boundaries. My own voice. My own center. That dinner, the one that cost me over $200 and some raised eyebrows, was expensive, yes. But it was also valuable. It was a line drawn in velvet and stone. It reminded me that I do not need to earn respect by paying for it, that I do not need to tolerate being diminished to be loved. So, even though it was an expensive but very valuable dinner,